Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. Welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. It's episode 256. I missed you guys last week, but Ben, I appreciate you holding down the fort without me while I was on the road. If you're brand new, make sure to check out all of our other content. We've got a whole back catalog of episodes. We've got shorts. We've got shorter educational content. We've got blogs, downloadable content, and the Freight Broker Basics course available on our website if you want to look at a full-length training option. And share us with your friends. This is a great way to get some one-on-one level knowledge and some more advanced knowledge if you are working for a smaller company that doesn't have a big training program or department, or if you're just kind of on your own or at a smaller company. So, Ben, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm curious to hear how your trip was.
You said a hurricane come through Florida. I mean, I know it wasn't your side of it, but you get some of the after effects of the rain and stuff, or what?
Yeah, I mean, like it definitely rained a lot, but it wasn't like noteworthy on our side of things. But I'll tell you what, like the thunder and the tornado warnings were like, I don't know that I've ever seen, or at least I don't remember shelter in place warnings. Like this is the first time I remember, like I literally took Ava out of her bed, right, and moved her into our room where we had like the hurricane shutters closed, because I'm like, I mean, yeah. And you could see it coming up from Fort Lauderdale. You could see the storm on the radar, like starting to spin. And I was like, yeah, I mean, so
we had a tornado like about a month ago in Buffalo, and we like sheltered in the basement, and we had another one on Monday this week. There's crazy videos of it. It actually made national news, but like it started in Fort Erie, Ontario, came across like I guess that'd be like the mouth of Lake Erie, Niagara River, into downtown Buffalo. And like it was an EF1 and just came through it. And like, I mean, there was, I think, a couple $1 million in damage. No like fatalities or anything, luckily. But yeah, just tornado in Buffalo, man. Yeah. It's wild.
And the thing is, for sure, like there was one a couple years ago that touched down very close, like 10 miles up the road up in, it was in like Delray or, just kind of north of us. But it tore up like a whole community, like significant damage. And like since then, now when I see those warnings, I mean, because tornadoes are super unpredictable. They don't like move steadily across. They like jump, appear, disappear. Like yeah. I'm definitely more concerned now than I've probably ever been, where I'm like, when I see that, I'm like, yeah, like let's go into the room, into the owner's closet, or get away from the windows, because like, all it takes is a 2x4, a tree, a branch. I mean, that thing flies through that window. Like,
yeah, wild
for sure.
It's a good, and I know we've done other episodes on, how to handle disaster stuff, hurricanes, etc. But it's worth noting that we're at that time of year. So if you're going to get involved in FEMA freight, get yourself registered. And also, if you've got customers that are in the typically impacted areas of hurricanes, like Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, et cetera, we typically have a pretty good warning system for this stuff. We see it coming, about a week out. And as we get closer to the landfall, we've got the predictive models get really accurate. So plan ahead, talk with your customers, and strike when the iron's hot as far as opportunity. So. Sweet. Let's talk a little sports here. So Olympic update here. We're coming to the close of the Olympics in Paris. We've got USA leading in literally every single medal count, total, golds, silvers, and bronzes. So we're recording on Wednesday morning. It's at 86 total right now. Have you gotten a chance to watch any Olympics? I've been watching it like every day. It's great.
A little bit, but not really. Every time I've tried to catch something, I miss the thing I wanted to watch. I wanted to watch some of the surfing. I wanted to watch some of the golf.
Oh, dude, yeah, surfing's really cool.
Didn't get to catch it.
Yeah, it's wild, man. Team USA for women's soccer is going to the gold, like the championship match against Brazil. So that'll be a good one. I think that's this weekend. Is that this weekend? I don't know. I forget. I think Saturday. When does it end?
When's the basketball game? The basketball gold medal game?
That's a great question. I don't know. There's just so much I can't track all of it. Yeah. But let's see here. I think it's Saturday for the. I'm not going to waste any time looking for it, but it's all coming up. So
Yep.
good stuff. Hey, we're back to NFL season, man. Literally this weekend. So we had the Hall of Fame game was I think last Thursday.
Yeah.
But you got preseason kicking off this weekend, man. It's Bills Bears on what is it, Saturday? Yeah, Saturday. And then actually Bills Steelers the next week, man. A little preseason
Oh,
action.
really?
Yeah.
Nice.
And that'll be in Pittsburgh. So it's, obviously preseason is, take it for what it's worth. A lot of people aren't actually, you don't get a lot of starters until maybe the final game. They might play a quarter or half, something like that. But a good chance for a lot of the draft picks, the rookies, right? Newly signed free agents to get a chance to get some live reps with in a real game situation where there's literally nothing on the line. I'm just excited. I saw a funny meme yesterday that was like, it's officially, or no, what was that? Between now and February, there will be 0 weekends without football. And I was like, this is a good feeling. This is like my favorite time
That
of
it
year,
is.
man. The next like 6 months of just good old football. So
I do really miss fall, and I'm excited for summer to be over, to be honest, because summer is your winter for me.
yeah,
Like, our summer is the worst time of year weather wise. Like, July and August, I mean, I've got to change my shirt 3 times in a day just walking out to get to the mail. So I am really looking forward to changing of the seasons.
nice. Very good. Very good. In news, unless you got anything else in sports.
I
No.
don't.
Oh, dude. Scotty Scheffler won the gold
He
for the
did win the
Olympics
gold.
golf, right?
Yeah.
Really cool, man. He had a very emotional podium when they did the national anthem for the USA, and it's pretty cool.
The,
I actually really enjoy watching the golf last week because when you watch golf normally, it's flooded with advertisements, like
mhm.
all over their like their
Yes.
outfits, all around the course, the commercials, and it's literally they just had like just wearing golf
It's
attire
like
and
the
like
watching the Ryder Cup, right?
yeah,
Like,
exactly. So it's pretty cool. All right, news. Producer Steven found this one for us earlier this week. This is MercuryGate, TMS provider. Some of you may use it or have heard of it. Purchased by Corber, a company called Corber Supply Chain Software. I don't really know what that means or anything, but maybe they get some more funding. They're going to try and beef up their platform. There's a lot of newer TMS platforms out there that are offering some really cool web-based, cloud-based services. So maybe they're just trying to step their game up, and who knows? Um, what else do we have here in the notes? Just announced. Oh, this is from DAT. Just announced our strategic partnership with Orderful, an advanced EDI vendor specializing in end-to-end document management for enterprise-level shippers. This collaboration will enable both parties to provide enhanced market insights and broader supply chain intelligence. Nice. You can read more on LinkedIn or probably their press release section. I'm curious, Ben. I know this is not a news article, but what have you been seeing with the market? Like, because I'll tell you, I feel like we're starting to see the change a little bit. Like we just posted up a record month in July, highest ever that I've seen. So curious what you're seeing as far as rates, capacity, all of the above.
I'm seeing things shift more than they have recently. I mean, over the past 2 years, like lane rates changing quickly and drastically in very
Yeah,
short periods of time. Which again, like I always say this too, because it's like we always feel it first as brokers because we're most exposed to it, right? Like we're talking to more carriers. Carriers are more likely to ask us for more money immediately when the lane changes, or even in an afternoon. We see that fluctuation long before a shipper does because shippers mostly have, assured capacity, they're dedicated lanes. Like carriers aren't going back to a shipper directly and saying, like, hey, this lane moved, $700 in the past 2 weeks. We need a price increase because it's a longer bid, right? And the trade off, which we'll talk about in this episode. So like we see this way more and we're exposed to it at a different rate. And like I'm seeing it a lot. Like I've seen some lanes go in the past 2-3 weeks that were only $2,000-$3,000 lanes have moved $600-$700 in either direction,
wow.
up and down. I mean, and days of the week. which is the other thing. Like a few of the clients I work with have seen this a lot over the past few months is they'll have lanes, some of them like in the Midwest areas, Monday and Tuesday, they're able to cover for, 12, 15% margin. Thursdays, they're losing 25% just to cover
Wow.
the same lane on a different day of the week because the carriers and the capacity just aren't there for whatever reason that day of the week. So, I mean, I think we're seeing more volatility from like an anecdotal perspective, just personally. So, I mean, I think that's good because you need that to happen. We need the disruption for the market to shift in the normal patterns it does to create more spot opportunities and more areas for us to be able to help, work with other customers, different carriers. Like it's what creates the market.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, today we're literally going to talk about pricing, like RFPs, bids, all of that in general. We'll break it down for you. And I've done quite a bit of this lately with some of our different branches and agents in our company, and um, seeing like actually like looking at the rates, it blows my mind. Both what we're currently seeing, the historical and the predictive future rates from DAT's rate cast. I saw a lane, it was like last week or 2 weeks ago, that was it was into California and then out of California, and it was like $1 a mile into Cali, and then like triple that coming out. And the guy's
Yep.
like, why is it like this? And I'm like, well, volumes out of Southern California are super high right now. So people will take
Yeah.
cheap loads in there,
Get the
especially if
money
they're
out.
coming from a fairly like um, dead area that doesn't have a lot of outbound freight. Because they know when they get to California and unload, they're going to get high paying freight out of there because capacity is so tight. If you go to the market conditions map on DAT, like it's like just red every single day in California outbound. So meaning extremely tight. But
Well, to
but
the
yeah,
other point, Stephen added this here too, and this is the thing that I think is always worth keeping in the back of your mind is that there are two things that affect the price in the market. The supply of freight, right? And the demand. Well, the demand in our world is the supply of freight because if you have a shipment to move, you need a truck. So that's considered the demand. Supply are the number of carriers in any given market that can move that, right? And economically speaking, like most of GDP and why the economy still seems to be doing well is related to like government spending and healthcare, which isn't usually translated into shipping. Manufacturing is either kind of flat or down. It's not really growing. And same with a lot of other consumer spending. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next few months because the Fed has indicated they might cut 50 basis points next month, which would be like
yeah.
one of the largest cuts. And if they do that, that could absolutely spur consumer spending. People could start spending more money. I mean, for the holiday
Businesses
season,
spending more money, yeah, all the
businesses
above.
holding more inventory because the cost to have that inventory is cheaper because there's less cost to borrow money. Like we could start to see that shift where more things are being purchased than needing to be shipped. At the same time, the carriers are kind of, I don't want to say running out of cash, but like I do think Craig Fuller had a really good point talking about COVID money on the carrier side of the market. Like hundreds of millions of dollars were spent to make sure businesses could stay in business, but also they've been able to survive probably longer and a good that's not a bad thing, but it's changing the typical economic cycle of how it moves around the country. And I think we're starting to get closer back to a normal economic cycle, which is I think good news for everybody. Carriers,
Yeah.
shippers not the most. They're going to be the ones that are going to be the most upset because they've had 2 years of calm seas, if you will, after the chaos of the pandemic. But it's
Yep.
around the corner to where they're not going to have all the leverage like they do now, which makes prospecting a hell of a lot easier for us.
Yeah. So I want to talk about bids, and I want to like really peel back layers on this. So um, to break it down like Barney style for you, what is a bid to start off with, right? Like you hear it call an RFP, RFQ, bid. Um, So RFP is usually a request for pricing or request for proposal, depending on the company. RFQ, request for quote or quotation. Bid is literally it's all the same, right? Basically, the
Yeah.
customer says, "Here are my expected shipments for whatever time frame. It could be the next year, the next 6 months, the next month, um, and I want you to give your pricing." And we can kind of get into the different layers of it. Have you seen more customers going towards bids lately, or like because they want contracted lanes, or have you seen more on the spot, or just kind of not really a big change either way?
I've seen a lot more bids, but it could just be what our sales team is prospecting, to be
Right.
honest. I
Yep.
mean, a lot of them are going after, and our sales team are mostly people who've been in the industry for 10 plus years. So they're going after companies that are larger, that they've known or worked with in the past, that they're trying to work with again. So, in almost all of those companies that are, you would call like, if there's three buckets of customer types, small, medium, and large, the large ones almost all typically have a bid process to be able to
Yep.
get involved.
Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? Quickscope stands out as the only load level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, Quickscope is deployed post agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join today.
And again, we're seeing less of it. Even like some of the smaller mid-sized shippers, I would say, like I was working on one right before this, is a bid. And I mean, it's not huge, like 50 lanes with a few different pickups. I mean, not a giant company, but they still want to see where our pricing's at, I think, as an introductory, right? Like, hey, we're having conversations. They want to consider working with us. So they're like, hey, send us over your rates on these lanes. Let's compare it to what we have. And if you guys are in range, we'll talk a little bit more. Is kind of the way it
Yeah.
is also playing out.
I mean, so and the main reason that a customer would go to a bid, especially these larger companies, is there's a few reasons. Number one, it gives them predictability because they can predict what their freight spend is going to be based on what people bid. Number two, it usually helps them save money because
Yes.
they're creating competition amongst their transportation providers. And number three, it's going to guarantee them consistency throughout the year and their freight spend. So for the example of a 12-month bid, the customer is going to say, let's say it's August right now. Let's say the bid goes September through the end of next August, right? They're going to say, we want your pricing on this lane, and it's going to stay consistent the entire year, with the exception of probably a fuel surcharge, which we can explain in a little bit here. But whereas the motor carrier that's running that, or the freight broker that gets contracted that, whoever it is going to find varying costs. So like more so the broker, right? Because as a broker, if we have to then find a carrier on a spot load or spot market basis, it's going to cost us different amounts of money throughout the year, depending on the region it's in, external factors, etc. And carriers, right? Their costs tend to be pretty much the same, but they could be giving up the opportunity to make more money in a different lane in the spot market at certain times of the year. While on the flip side, they might be making more money in a bid certain times of the year because the spot market would be paying less. So there's pros and cons, and I always caution people, if you're going to do a bid, to think like big term here. Like you don't want to under underbid and overcommit yourself on the volume, because then if you end up getting awarded it and the market goes crazy, you either have to take a loss on a lot of business, or you pretty much just have to tell your customer, sorry, I can't do this, and you likely lose your opportunity to do any business with them moving forward. So there's definitely some
Correct.
risk reward when you get into this bid business.
And again, like just very simply, like think of it like this. If anybody's new to this, right? Like the market is going to go up and down throughout the year. Now, the past 2 years were definitely different as a result of the pandemic. So you saw more stable rates across the country that didn't fluctuate as much. However, typically our industry, if you look back 40 years, like it cycles every 12 to 14 months, long end, maybe 18, but it's like between loose and tight, it just keeps cycling over where like when the business is good, lots of people enter it. And then there's more of those people to take the business. So then the prices come down. And then it just does that over and over again. And the whole economy does that. That is free market capitalism. That's how it functions, right? Now, what you're seeing though in a bid, right? If you think about it, in any given year, even if the average rates per mile are pretty consistent across the whole country, right? Like they still change per lane and per region, right? And I'll just give like a really obvious example. Like you pick California. Most large produce companies, right, operate in both like Southern California, where they grow a lot of it because they're closer to it, right?
Yep.
Cheaper to ship when you're close. However, in the winter, they typically move down to Arizona where it's warmer, and most of that product comes up through Mexico because they're closer to it there, right? So what you see in the most obvious, I think, shift for anyone to think about is, okay, like if you're a company and you literally move all of your operations from one state to another for a season and then move it back, right? Okay, where your trucks are coming from and going changes, obviously, right? But that
Yes.
affects all of the other trucks, right? So for instance, when you see this switch from like Nogales, for example, to Southern California, trucks love to go into that area. Why? Because there's a lot of freight coming out of it. All the produce companies are there. They've got lots of freight to move into the country. You will see trucks going into the Arizona and sometimes Texas area very cheaply because there's a lot of money and a lot of loads that need to get out. However, as soon as all of these companies shift their operations, and it's usually within a few weeks of each other, like there's a pretty tight window. It's not like they all do this at random times because once all that produce shifts to California and it starts growing locally, now there's no freight coming out of that area and trucks don't want to go there at all. So it changes that rate throughout the year very seasonally. And that's why in California, to your point, when all the produce is really coming to harvest and coming out, it's very cheap to send a truck into California, but gets very expensive to send it out. And then as soon as that season ends, it kind of levels out between maybe a little more like equilibrium, same rate kind of with what's coming out.
Yeah, depending
So
on where it's coming from or going to. Yeah.
right. So if
Yep.
you think about it, right, the market is shifting based on what is moving throughout the year. And again, this happens in every industry, not just produce. It's just an example that I think helps you visualize literally thinking of where these things come from. Because if you got a bid, again, if it's a 1 month bid, you're probably okay, unless it's the month of probably March when these companies actually shift. However, beyond that, like you can have pretty consistent pricing, usually for like a week or two. When you get up to a month or longer, there is volatility no matter what the lane is because of these things happening all over the country. So if you are working on a bid that is a year or 6 months or even a quarter, it is a very different strategy than pricing something in the spot market this week or this month. Because to your point, Nate, like what you need to consider is some of the lane, like let's just say you're shipping Los Angeles to Memphis, right? Well, some of that year, that rate coming out of LA to go to Memphis might be $4 a mile in season. And then as soon as that season's over, it drops to $2 a mile. So then we get the question like, well, how do I bid this? Do I bid it at 2 or 4? Well, if you bid it at 4, you probably won't get awarded any of it. And if you bid it at 2, you'll get awarded a lot of it and you'll literally be spending your own money to cover your customers' freight. And that doesn't work either. So
Yeah.
what larger companies do, and just that very specific example is like, you try to get as close as you can and look at a whole year. So, like, if you're fortunate enough to have lane history in your company for the past year, look at what you paid every month, or at least a few months throughout the year. Look at the highs and lows and go, okay, what we try to do with like a strategy is if let's just say 3 quarters of that year, the rate is 250 a mile, and 1 quarter of a year, it's 350 a mile. You want to price it so that like you're profitable for 3 quarters and hopefully break even for the 1 quarter. Like it's low enough that you can be awarded it when you need it, but not so low that you get
So
destroyed and have to give the loads back because you can't cover them when it gets
yeah,
high.
I'll give you an example of one strategy I've used. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. But one of the things I've done is whether you're using historical or predictive rates. So I'll use predictive, for example. So DAT has rate cast, which will give
I
you a
really
rough
like.
idea of where that median is going to fall up to about a year out. So I was doing a 6 month bid with somebody, and we looked at that 6-month window, and we averaged it out to figure out, excluding fuel, line haul alone, here is the average rate predicted per mile for this 6-month window. And we use that as our baseline, and we added our margin from that point. But the reality is, to your point, some months we're going to be running at a slight loss, some months a really good gain, and some months somewhere in between that, right? And it's going to fluctuate depending on, and not every lane has that volatility. Some lanes are pretty consistent around, around the calendar year, but other lanes aren't. It just depends. So let's go back to, when you get invited to a bid, let's talk about, what this first couple of steps looks like. Usually you get either a web link or you get a bunch of stuff emailed to you with attachments. Let's talk about some of the things that you should be looking for that give you, your instructions, your context, and really the idea of how this bid's going to operate. So, and fill me in on whatever I'm missing here because I'm going off the top of my head. But typically, like, your basic stuff is going to be, all right, what is the period of time that this bid takes place? Is it for the next 12 months, the next 6 months, et cetera? That's obviously important because you want to make sure you know what time of year you're going to be providing pricing for. It should also have your basic load information for each lane, origin, destination, equipment type. If there's any like high value or special, it's oversized, heavy haul, whatever, that should be in there. But also, and this is one that I think is really important, is what is the frequency of this lane? Meaning, how many instances do they project they're going to ship that lane during that upcoming bid? And to me, why that's important is you might have a lot of these, you might have a bid that's got like 1,500 lanes, but 80% of the freight is in 20% of the lanes that are in there. And then you've got the other 20% of freight spread across 80% of the lanes. So you get some of these lanes that have like 1 or 2 shipments in a year. And you're like, well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, sharpening my pencil to price out aggressively on a single shipment, right? My whole take was always, the single, the one-offs, or maybe there's less than 10, I'm going to bid them pretty damn high, because if I get them, sweet. If I don't, oh well, right?
Correct.
What else?
And I think
I'm gonna say, what else we have in a bid packet, but continue on with what your thought there.
I was gonna say, like, there's also usually a trade-off, right? Because the way the shippers look at this is they have leverage. What does leverage mean? They have power in the negotiation. Where does that power come from? The number of loads they have to award. So the more loads they have on a lane, the more they can offer a carrier, and what they hope to get in return by offering guaranteed volume. Like, hey, we'll give you the business, make sure you get it at this number. In return, give us a little bit of a discount on the rate. And why does that trade-off work for a carrier and a shipper? The shipper gets the discount, obviously. That's pretty obvious. But the carrier, like, why would a carrier want to run it for a little less than maybe they could get today to run that load?
Super predictable, right?
Yes.
It helps them plan. It's guaranteed business for them over a certain amount of time.
Right. Yeah. They don't have to find a load. They don't have to worry about paying a dispatcher to secure a load. The prices that they will get will sometimes be higher than they would have gotten, and sometimes they'll be lower, and sometimes they might have to deadhead. So it makes their business easier to operate because it's easier to predict, and the drivers like being able to pick up at the same places, knowing the facility, knowing how long it takes to get in and out. It makes a lot of things better, right? Yeah. So to give up a little bit of profit to get a lot of other things that you should be able to make money on once you get the return. Your dispatchers work on other loads. They can sell to other direct shippers to try to get you more customers. Like, there's the return that you use that for, but you take that discount for it, right? So, but to your point, right, like, that's the trade-off.
In freight, time is money and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes. The other question I think that's really important that isn't asked that often is if you get a bid, let's say it's a large bid, call it 200 lanes or 500 lanes, right? What is your approach when you have to look at a bid that is like daunting, like literally hundreds of lanes? What is your
So,
first
and
move?
I could have a totally different approach than you do, but I'll give you specific examples of one that I did recently. I literally will sort them by number of like how frequent that lane is. And I want to see
Volume.
up top this first lane. This is the one that does the most shipments per year, right? And I filter
Yep.
them in descending order all the way down to the bottom, which might be one instance. And I always say, okay, my tactic here would be focus. I don't necessarily think you need to bid every single lane in a bid. If you're a broker, a big brokerage, and you want to, have at it. But if you're just one person or a very small company, I wouldn't bid 2,000 lanes for a huge company. I would focus on the lanes that meet a couple of criteria for it. Number one, you have familiarity with that lane. You understand its, how vulnerable it might be when it comes to pricing, and lanes that you have carriers that you already have a relationship with that you could
Yes.
talk to, because they're more likely to commit to you instead of having to go to the spot market every single time you have to book one of these. But you could talk with your carrier and say, hey, I was invited to this bid. I think this lane might be a great fit for us and for you guys to take a chunk out of this if we get awarded it. And you can kind of work with them on that pricing to see what will work for them. How does that look for you? Add your margin in. Are you going to be competitive, et cetera? So that's the way I look at it. And I'm always focusing on those high density lanes first, because you can, it's much easier to cover, 1,000 loads in 2 lanes than it is if you win 1,000 loads spread across 100 lanes, right?
Correct.
Because it's the same,
There's
it's repetition.
I end up at the same result, but there's also a little bit of a different rationale. And I want to talk a little bit too, right? Is okay, so if you see a bid for a year, right? Let's just use round numbers 52 weeks in a year. Okay. If any of those volumes are less than 52, it is not a weekly load, right?
Yeah.
What else is true when it's not a weekly load? Is if you're a trucking company, it's very hard for you to plan for a load that is one offs or once a month or twice a month. Because again, like they're trying for predictability week in and week out. It's harder for a carrier, right, to pivot and find and cover a load that comes out of the blue that they didn't expect. So any loads that are less than 50 a year on these bids, they're far more likely to go to a broker. Why are they likely to go to broker? For that reason, because like they're usually unexpected and that shipper doesn't know how many sales they'll make to that customer that needs that lane. So like they just use what their guess was last year and their predictions this year to guess. So like there's a real high
Yes.
probability that those loads end up with a broker, even if a carrier was cheaper, because even though the carrier was cheaper, when the shipper calls that carrier to pick up that load, they might not have a truck that week in that area. So then what
Agreed.
do? They go to the bid and pick the next cheaper. Well, that's probably also a carrier, which is likely to be the same thing. Once they get to the third or fourth down the line, now you're usually going to see a broker from the shipper's perspective that's got a higher rate, obviously, just like your bid was higher. And that's why you always, at least from my perspective as a broker, like I bid those a little higher because I don't want to be the cheapest. I know there's a pretty high likelihood they'll need a broker because the trucks can't make it work last minute. And
Yep.
I need enough money to cover that with less time. So I end up at the same place you were. I just want to add some context to how I think it
Yes.
looks from the shipper's point of view
Yep.
as to where they go. The
So,
other thing, I
yeah, go
want to
ahead.
finish one last thing on like what you said, the carrier piece. Ideally, this is how I think it should look like conceptually, and then how you could do this is if you could look at every lane you actually have carriers running for you, right? Let's just say you literally could look at them in a spreadsheet or whatever. These are carriers that run these lanes for me every week or consistently. The lanes I want to bid for that large bid are the opposite of those lanes for those carriers. So, for instance, if I run Dallas to Memphis every week with a carrier, that bid I am going to email that carrier and be like, hey, I'm working on a bid for Memphis to Dallas. Do you guys want to participate? Because I know I'm sending you to Memphis every week. Do you guys need backhauls? I know you're based in Texas. Most of your drivers need to get back. They are likely to give me a better price because they need that lane. They don't want to grab spot loads every week to go back to Texas home. They'd rather have the dedicated freight, just like we discussed. So they'll give me a better price because I know they need that. And they trust me because we work together and I'm trying to help them get them the freight that fits their network, their routing guides. So I get a little bit of a better price. And then I go and say, how much loads can you take? And again, I'm always including the volume for the same reason a shipper does. And I'm talking to this carrier and I'm going, hey, like there are like, it looks like about 100 loads a month on this lane. How many do you think you guys can handle? And if they go, hey, I got 3 drivers who can take these every week. Okay. Like I'm going to bid according to what that carrier can handle. And then I'm using the same volume the shipper does to work my price in with the carrier. Like, hey, look, if I can get you 5 of these loads a week or 3 loads a week, I know you guys want to be at $1.90 or $2.10 a mile or whatever the lane is. Can you knock like 3 or 4% off this? Not for me to keep that money. And that's the thing I think there's a big misconception in the industry. It's because I'm going to pass that savings to my customer. And I'm not going to work a higher margin just because the carrier is cheaper. I'm using the discount they provide for the volume and I pass that on to the shipper, meaning I can be more competitive in the bid from the shipper's perspective to be awarded that lane. And
Yep.
if you can do that, again, say I got 500 lanes and I only got 25 lanes I'm running that match up, like those are the ones I focus on. I'll probably bid another 25 or 50 lanes just to put my name in a hat to see because I think they might be a good fit where I could find carriers pretty easily and get a decent rate. But those are the ones that I'm going to focus on to be most competitive on. I put the most time in, I'm the most likely to win because my objective to what you said earlier in a large bid, even a smaller bid is I'm not trying to win all of them. I will never win all of them. Even if I'm the cheapest across the board, no shippers giving all their business to one provider.
It'd be very dumb to
So
do that. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be everything to everyone. I'm trying to be focused on where I can add value. And then I pick another few that I think I've got a good advantage on because I also move out of that area. I've got other shippers there, carriers that I've worked with, maybe even like last year that I'm just not running with this year. I'm reaching out to them going, hey, if you guys are still in this area, I'd like to bid with you guys. That's where the effort's going to go in. And then I'm going to compare the rates again, still against DAT, but like I'm going to get real truck in hand rates almost to negotiate those almost as if I'm been awarded them. Like that's the
Yep.
effort I'll put in for
Yep.
that.
So I want to go back to Steven put a couple of things in the notes here, and I wanted to go back to the sort of the beginning here. One of the things he mentioned is asking them about, what lanes are new compared to the previous bid or previous year, and
Yep.
then how much capacity to actually say you have, because it'll say hey, we've got 100 shipments of this lane. How many can you cover? So we'll talk through some of that strategy in a minute, but what I think was great that he mentioned was to ask questions about what's new. And in general, just because a bid is sent out and it feels very informal, it feels very formal, like, hey, this is all, packaged up very nicely. Everybody has to go in and put your pricing in. No, you can still call your rep, your PO, your point of contact at the customer and like talk to them like human to human. Be like, all right, so I got this bid. I just want to clarify a couple of things here because the bid packet doesn't always tell you everything, right? I want to know, is there a list of accessorials? What is the fuel surcharge schedule? Meaning, we're going to bid line haul rates because we don't know what fuel is going to cost 6 months from now. So what is your fuel
Yep.
surcharge schedule? How many rounds does this bid have? Do I get live feedback
Yes.
on this? That's a huge thing too, because some are just like, you get one chance, put your pricing in, the cheapest person wins, right? And then others, and again, they can all be different, but others might, like I'm on one right now that's literally what you're going to do it today. It's its third round
Mm-hmm.
of bidding, and they've pushed back the start date for the bid like 3 times now. But every single time we're giving feedback on what percentile our pricing lines up or comes out at based off the previous submission. Are we in the top 5%, or are we in 6 to 10%, etc. And that gives you good feedback on, hey, you're really competitive here, right? Or hey, maybe you're not so competitive here. Here's an opportunity to sharpen the pencil if you want to. Other things are, how does their routing guide work, right? If If
Yes.
there's a tender rejected by an asset-based carrier, whoever it's awarded to, does it then go to the second person on that list or the third person? And what you'll find out in some of these is that they might have like they'll say you're first, second, and third place for this lane. If first place says no, it goes to two. If two says no, it goes to three. If three says no, it goes to the spot board. Others might have a list of like eight. Others might just have one or two. I mean, it's all different. And if you can
Yes.
hop on the phone and have a conversation with your rep at the shipper, they'll oftentimes give you a little bit more inside feedback than you otherwise would have gotten from the bid itself. When they say, hey, here's your percentile, they might be like, hey, just want to let you know, so and so is ahead of you guys by about 10 cents a mile on this lane, right? You can
Yes.
get that kind of feedback. And because the reality is, if your customer likes you, they're going to want you to get awarded that bid, but it's also
Right.
their job to make sure that they're doing a good service to their company. So it's in their best interest to give you feedback to get you to, help you get awarded that lane because they've had a good experience with you. They want to work with you. They don't want to work with some new person over at CH Robinson or TQL or whatever. But yeah,
Well,
have the conversation, ask questions.
and it's true for two reasons, right? They know you, like you, and trust you. But what does that really mean? In value in a negotiation, it means they know what they know what they get for what they pay for. So they're willing to help because they know the service that is commensurate with the rate you provide. A lot of the other companies, they don't know. It's a crapshoot on whether or not that truck will pick up the load on time, pick up the load at all, or reject the load. So there's risk to the shipper in doing this and sending it out to lots of these providers. That's why that happens, right? And like I have shippers that I've known for years that trust me a lot. Like they literally tell me exactly what everyone else is bidding for the exact same reason. Like would rather use you because your communication's there. You pick up the phone when we need to. If we get jammed up, you rush to help us. Like the service is there. Would rather have you be competitive with them than just award to the cheapest carrier because then our service isn't great. So like that happened to me yesterday. And then the other thing too, I think it's really important is that like asking questions and how you frame the question when you reach out. Because I've seen a lot of this even recently where shippers will even say, like, hey, don't reach out for questions. We're not going to provide feedback. We want to know your rates and what you would say without us telling you anything. And they do that because they just want to see what you're willing to do, mostly to test your integrity and to see what you're going to throw out there first. However, the way I found that is most effective to actually start that conversation and have it is to not frame it as something that's important to me and something I need. Because if I call you and go, I need to know where you need the most help, where are the lanes you want me to cover that you struggle the most. Now, again, they might feel as if I'm trying to help them, but like they know there's self-interest in there. The way I always try to frame it is, listen, like I want to bid these accurately, and I really want to understand how this lane moves for you so that I can price it accurately. And sometimes they might email back like, oh, what do you mean? And I'll be like, okay, like for instance, I saw one of these a few weeks ago with a client I was helping with was there were extra stops next to the line haul and they just wanted a flat rate. So when they added extra pickups, they could just price it easily. Well, that makes sense from the shipper's point of view. But from a broker or a carrier point of view, like how do you quote something if you don't know where the extra stop is? How many mileage is there? Is it first come, first serve? Is it by appointment? Like if you are running a bid, like for instance, to go to grocery stores, this is really common in produce, like they're all by appointment. Well, if that truck is delayed at the last stop and you got a one pick five drop and they're at a Publix and they're stuck unloading at no fault of the driver, and you schedule the appointments so that the driver's efficient and not waiting so they can run through these and get to their next load, that problem at that receiver can cause them not to make the next appointment, which then we either need to spend time to do, which sometimes happens fast, sometimes not fast at all. And the driver now may need to wait like a half of a day for the next available appointment because the driver at the last stop was stuck there. When he gets to the next one, he's 15 minutes late for his appointment. He's a working now 6 hours later. That carrier just incurred a huge cost, a half a day's worth of work lost to no fault of his own because your customer couldn't get him unloaded on time. These are the things that shippers intentionally don't put in there, and they just want you to throw a rate to make their life easier. And if you ask them it that way, they sometimes get offended and go like, what do you mean? Like everyone quotes it this way. What I always try to say is like, yes, I just try to want to understand how this actually runs so I can give you the most competitive and fair pricing based on what happens in real life. Not just it's got to go from here to here to here under these parameters. Like, how easy is it to move an appointment? Is that shipper or receiver constantly accommodating if a driver comes in 15 minutes late, not because the driver did anything wrong, but because your last pickup took too long. Will they work them in? Is that a 6-hour process? How's your detention work? Because
Yeah.
all of those things don't seem to be important when you're doing the bid. You're just looking at math and numbers and rates. But in a practical sense, when you go to run that lane, you might book a carrier on it the first time and be able to make it work. And that carrier never wants to run that lane again because of these things that played out. And then when you go to cover the next load, every other carrier that's ever run that load for another broker or shipper goes, like, I'm not taking that load for that rate. I know I'm going to be stuck at a few of those pickups. I know it'll take me an extra half day. I need an extra $400 for it. Meanwhile, you price this with a $200 margin, and now you've got a load you committed to, and you can't even get a carrier to run it, all because you didn't ask these questions in the bid process to understand how this freight actually moves and what are the things that can go wrong and what you can do to actually help keep their freight moving.
You ever do a bid that isn't even run by the customer? It's run by like a third party.
Yes, a
Yeah,
lot of them,
and those are super frustrating. Like, and
for
I'm
sure.
I'm not even talking about like they're using a system on like an online
E2
platform.
open
I'm
or,
talking like
yeah.
they have a basically like a 4PL that comes in and is like, hey, we're gonna. I had this. This is like probably 10 years ago now. I did one, and it was terrible. Like we were calling the customer, being like, having got questions, and they're like, why? They're like, I have no idea. That's so and
Yeah.
so's. And then we try
And
to
then they
call
don't
so and
answer the
so, and they
phone.
don't answer, and it's like, what's
Nope.
going on here?
No
Ridiculous.
communication. And
Yeah.
it's ironic is that, like, we're complaining from like our point of view, but even from their point of view, those processes and procedures that they think benefit them actually hurt them. Why? Because if you don't provide the right information for what you're trying to price, no matter who's bidding it, isn't informed, isn't pricing it based on all the information, which means they're far more likely to reject the loads at some point during the year anyway. They run them a few times, realize the reality, and just go, like, our truck can't run that lane anymore. We're giving it back. Now, all of
Yeah.
a sudden, the shipper's trying to recover a large portion of their freight because, oh, they just weren't clear and didn't feel like it was worth taking the time to explain the work they're actually getting bid. It'd be like trying to put
Yep.
a bid on a house and them going, hey, I need new windows, a new roof. Can you give me a number? And they went, yeah, can I see your house? You go, no. And they went, well, how big's the roof? They go, I don't know. It's a little bigger than this house and a little smaller than this one. Okay, well, like, I don't know how much material, I don't know how much time. How many windows do you have? I don't know, 10 to 15. They're probably 4 feet, maybe they're 10 feet. I don't know, somewhere in the middle. Like, you would never be able to do that in any other scenario. But in shipping, for some reason, shippers have this impression that, like, oh, it's mileage in a truck, you should be able to give a rate. We saw one this week that was to state, trying to bid a rate from like New York to the state of Tennessee. Well, okay, well, if it's picking up in the Bronx or in Syracuse, it's a heck of a lot different than Buffalo to Memphis or to the middle of the state out of the rural areas of New York. Like,
Yep.
there's different rates based on what's happening. And shippers know that. They're just trying to use all the power they have to bully us. And to be honest, most of the time it bites them in the ass. They've been lucky for 2 years, but during the pandemic, this is what happened. This is why they all ended up in those positions. So
Yep.
they shortened the bid process, but now you're starting to see them get longer. My guess is they're going to shorten again soon.
Yeah, like more of a mini bid. Less tender rejection for sure. I'm gonna pick your brain on this one. So Steven said, when they ask you how much you can handle, don't just enter how many they predict. Always go over because their system might cut you off. That's interesting. I've never considered that, and and this is a great, again, another good question to ask your customers. Like, hey, obviously this bid is kind of a catch-all for brokers and asset-based carriers. I'm a broker. I don't have a limit on the number of assets I have access to because I can access the entire market. Should I bid all of them or what? And they might tell you, yeah, you just bid the max, or no, don't bid the max because it looks unrealistic. Or they might say, bid, over it or whatever. And I think every system could be set up a little bit different. What is your which have you had any experience in that where as a broker, how would you let's say they've got 500 shipments in a certain lane. Would you bid 500? Would you bid 400? Would you bid 700?
I never bid over it, but it's a good point, and I'll
Yeah,
consider
I've
doing
never
it
bid over
now
either.
because because just in the same way they don't know if it will be 100 loads that year, they don't know if it'll be 90, they don't know if it'll be 110. And I would say that the thing that happened I've seen last week was the exact opposite. meaning like saw someone get awarded a lane and they were probably the best price, and the commitment level was 2 or 3 loads a week, 3 loads a week, right? And then the lane moved about $600 in like 5 days, right? So then the shipper went, oh, well, they're the cheapest. And they gave them 6 loads instead of the 3 they committed to. And then the broker was like, well, I just kind of took them because like I felt like I needed to, like, but they couldn't cover any of them even for break even.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically, the shipper will for sure take advantage of these scenarios when they go the other way too. Meaning, like if you're the cheapest and you're taking 1 or 2, and that's what you committed to, they're going to oftentimes double it if they can get you to take it and try to pull one over on you, because they know they don't want to lose money on it. They know every other carrier they're talking to about that lane is going, I'm not taking that load into Florida this week. There's a hurricane. Give them to someone else. They'll give them to the newest broker or the newest carrier and go, hey, we decided to award you twice the business. Congratulations. Right?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of tactics. And I'll kind of wrap up with pricing strategy like this is
I got one more question before you
yeah,
wrap up.
yeah, go
How
ahead.
do you price multi-stop? What do you guys use? So like, do you add
Great question.
75, 125, 150? What do you price the stop and the mileage for when you run into
So
these
here's
situations?
what I do for multi-stop. And this is a great time to explain. I'll give a real example, right? You mentioned New York to Tennessee. So let's say it's um, Buffalo, a stop in Pittsburgh, and delivers in um, Memphis. Okay.
Yep.
So how would I price that? Some people think, well, I've got to price Buffalo to Pittsburgh, and then I have to price Pittsburgh to Memphis, and that's not the case. What you
No.
really care about is where's the true origin and where is the true destination. Because so I'm going to price it as Buffalo to Memphis, and I'm going to figure out the mileage. Reason is the market conditions in Pittsburgh don't matter to that carrier because they're not doing anything there besides either picking up or dropping
Driving
something
through it.
off. But they already have their next direction is go to Memphis. So what I would do is I take the rate per mile from origin to the final destination, and then I will get the PC miler distance for the entire route, including stopping in Pittsburgh, which
Yep.
might add 50 miles. It might only add 10 miles. But what it's going to definitely do is add time with the stop. So I typically factor in $50 to $100 per stop. And the more stops you have, you can typically go on the lighter side of that. So if you have like an 8-stop load, you might add $50 a stop because they're not going to be there for very long. But if it's only one extra stop and it's going to be half of the truck being unloaded or loaded, probably going to go more like 100, maybe a little bit higher even. Depends on what you're hearing from carriers. But I'm usually in that $50 to $100 range for extra stops. So I'm going to go rate per mile from first pick to last drop, multiply that times the total route distance, add in a $50 to $100 per stop amount times the number of stops, and that gives me my expected freight spend to pay a carrier. Now I've got to add my margin in. And the way that I add my margin in general, this doesn't matter if it's multi-stop or one pick, one drop, is the higher the volume, the thinner the margin I'll go on it. I might go a 10% margin on there. If it's a lesser, not as frequent dense lane, maybe it's only, like you said, less than one a week. I'm going pretty high on that. Like I'm probably like 15 to 20%. Because if I get it, great, I've got some padding there. And if I don't, oh well. So that's kind of my general rule of thumb. And then that's like my starting point. And then I'll look at every lane in that bid that I really want. And then I'll start to do some really, really detailed research. Like, what did we cover it for last year if we have the data, right? What is DAT showing for predictive rates? Call some carriers, right? Who do I know that this might be a good backhaul for, or even a head haul, depending on, if it's a preferred lane in general. Do some research, and then you can really get granular on your pricing. But again, this whole process can eat up your entire day or week or month if you let it just, absorb your time. So you have to balance out what's worth the time that I invest here. Is it going to be this bid of 6 lanes that is going to give me peanuts? Or is it these 3 specific lanes for this huge shipper that I've got a good relationship with that I think I can, take my company to the next level on? So, but anyway, back to your multi-stop. I do a fixed rate per stop, $50 to $100 is what I typically go for. But that's
The
that
only
can change
thing,
over time depending on what kind of stop it is,
yeah,
right? Like Steven mentioned, Walmart and what did he put?
Dollar General.
It should be illegal to include Walmart or Dollar General on multi-stop loads. Worst receivers if you miss a appointment. Yeah, exactly. So, and it's not just them, right? There's other companies out there that you know how strict they are, and I'm gonna put in a little extra cost per stop because I know I'm gonna have to pay a carrier like, hey, you're gonna go here, and you know how congested it is and how disorganized they are, but I'm gonna pay you for it, right? So that's my take. How do you handle those?
The same way. The only thing that I always think a lot about is the coverage side because I'm like, if I got a one pick five drop, yeah, I think if I had my own trucks, I could price it at $50 to $100 per stop. But I know actually trying to cover that load of a one pick five drop, like a carrier doesn't want that load if they can pick up a one pick one drop, right? So like the premium usually to cover tends to go up when you get a lot of stops. That's why like they call them like milk runs in the industry, like, many stops and one pickup. Like they're usually more of a fit for like local carriers because they know where they're going. To cover that as a broker in the open market with like a new carrier, like tends to be harder because like the carrier also doesn't know if everything we talked about is true, right? When they're working with a broker and you're trying to get them to book on a 1.5, like you can tell them that, each receiver is easy to deal with, will work them in, is FCFS, but they know in practice, they've been told that so many times where it's not been true that they try to get as much as they can or just go get a different load because there's a lot of risk to the carrier. If those receivers, to Steven's point, are like Walmart or Dollar General and anything goes wrong during that load, they know they could lose like a half to a whole day on one load. So they usually have to pay a bit of a premium to book them on a load, unless you've got a carrier that you know and trust and you've worked this lane and you know those receivers. So like
Yeah,
that's where like sometimes when they get a large number of drops, I probably put closer to like 125 per drop, just because the coverage side, I'm giving almost all that money to the
yeah.
carrier to get them into it.
So here's the other thing too, and this really does depend because I've had I'll use your one pick five drop as an example. I've seen lanes like that, one pick, five drop, but all five drops are in the same metro area and they are literally super easy to take off. So if someone's going to get an extra $250 for 2 hours of their time, like that is well worth it, right? You're not
Yes.
going to have to pay 150 a drop. I think, and Steven did even put in here tiered pricing, depending on equipment type, 100, 125, 150, and then 150 for every step after three. It all depends, right? And you can use your common sense. If you're taking someone into a very densely traffic dense metro area and it's going to be congestion and it's going to take up a lot of time, you're going to have to pay them more per stop. Whereas if you've got literally, like I think about produce loads where they pick up from one shed and they deliver to like a bunch of um, either distribution centers in a similar area or um, they go to like Hunts Point and other different produce markets in a general similar region. You're not gonna you're not gonna compensate for stops like that the same way that you would if you're. I just think about this: how much time are you taking up? That's literally what it comes down to.
Yes.
How much of the driver's time are you asking for them to give up, and then compensate them commensurate to that? That's really what it comes down
Yep.
to. So I don't think there is a perfect way to do it, but rule of thumb, you definitely have to compensate for the additional stop, and I would say it depends on how long it's going to take. But to Steven's point too, the equipment type, right? Some equipment type is more costly than others, right? Reefer, you're running that reefer unit.
And
That's
opening the doors.
yeah. So good stuff, man. What else we got?
I think that kind of wrapped up most of what I think will help somebody understand and determine how to work through this, where to spend their time, where not to spend the time. We've gotten that question a lot, obviously, from like, we got it recently. I think Steve and I actually answered it last week where somebody was asking, like, do I just quote all these from DAT or do I go and like try to cover all of these loads first to quote? Like, you definitely don't want to try to cover all of them because you're not likely to be awarded all of them. And a lot of that time would be wasted, right?
For sure. For sure. All right. Well, good stuff. Good conversation. Talking about bids, right? Love it. Could have went on for hours, but
For sure.
we probably would have bored enough people. So, final
Exactly.
thoughts.
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.